Recognize the ranking member, Mr. Grijalva.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we're finally here to have an initial hearing on a draft piece of legislation dealing with the Land and Water Conservation Fund. The formal reauthorization, that deadline has passed. And since the passage of that deadline, millions upon millions, estimated $120 million, have not gotten to the fund. Money that needed to be collected from oil and gas through their royalty programs and to be redirected for the Land Water Conservation Fund. So we've lost both time and resources during that period of time. The majority has seen the Land and Water Conservation Fund as a target, that threatens to undermine this hearing, and this draft legislation tends to undermine one of the most popular and effective tools we have for improving the general quality of life for millions of Americans. The first half of the draft legislation deals with micromanaging the program, micromanaging it to death by dictating percentages on how those allocations would occur. This level of detail is really not needed when each and every LWCF dollar is appropriated by Congress through the appropriations process. The second half of the bill is, quite frankly, a rebate, a subsidy to oil and gas industry. LWCF, as I stated, returns a small slice of big oil's profits to the American people through this trust and to this fund. This bill would actually give these oil companies a chunk of the money back, in essence, a rebate. And there's been many allegations made about the Land and Water Conservation Fund in the last 5, 6, 7 months, since even before the expiration of the deadline. And let's look at these allegations that have been brought forth by the majority. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is a slush fund. It is not a slush fund. All LWCF expenditures are approved by Congress through the appropriations process. The proposed land acquisitions are developed over many years through a public planning process. This is more transparent than most federal spending and is the opposite of a slush fund. The Land and Water Conservation Fund has drifted from its original intent. It has not. Funding for state matching grants have fluctuated over the years, but this is not a drift. That is the result of previous Congress's appropriation decisions, many of which were made during the 16 of 20 years in which the Republican majority has been in charge of that process here in the House of Representatives, and supported by members sitting here in this room. So the results of fluctuation is due to the appropriation process and not drifting away from an original intent. Federal land management agencies have maintenance backlogs, and the PIL program is underfunded because Congress refuses to give them the funding they deserve. Any member here concerned about backlog maintenance or PIL should contact the Appropriations Committee immediately and express support for an increase for these programs. You can do that without having to gut LWCF and redirect from its original intent that funding. It's not a land grab by the federal government, LWCF. The federal funding is targeted at in-holdings already surrounded by federal land. Acquiring in-holdings does not increase the size of the federal footprint. Buying in-holdings can provide access to federal parcels that are closed because there is no public access route. These purchases are from willing sellers. There is no eminent domain. There is no taking. These are the people who want to sell their land. These arguments have been weak from the beginning. They continue to be weak because they were devised, I think, as part of a cover-up, an attempt to conceal what I believe is the real agenda behind this whole debate of the Land Water Conservation Fund. Those who support this draft legislation and its intent have a vision that we have reached the highest level of land and water conservation that we'll ever see. And from here on, the trend will be more development, more land sales, more land giveaways, and less public land. And I think the Land Water Conservation Plan stands in front of that vision, and the idea to ever to continue to shrink the open space in this country. The Land and Water Conservation Fund for 50 years has been providing balance in our resource management decision and tipping and keeping those scales balanced. To do what the draft legislation requires of us if it were to become law is to now shift the scales in favor of drilling, mining, paving, development on public lands. In closing, I want to just say the Democrats on this side of the aisle have asked that H.R. 1814 be included on today's agenda. We've asked for a hearing, a discussion, that a panel of members be allowed to testify. Both requests have not been acted upon. And there is 195 bipartisan co-sponsors to H.R. 1814 that I think their support for this merits a hearing. Therefore, at this point, pursuant to Rule 11 of the House Rules, we are hereby, this side of the aisle is insisting on a second day of testimony on this topic from witnesses that we will identify and submit to the chair. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is more important than many House Republicans may realize, and it deserves a fuller discussion on this legislation and a fuller discussion about what we can do as a Congress to move this very, very important program forward and to respond to the bipartisan demand and need by our colleagues to see this fund reauthorized as the bipartisan companion legislation in the Senate has done. With that, I yield back.